Kia ora koutou and welcome back to this next session. Now, as Claire mentioned at the closing of the last session, the Minister was delayed because of his flight delay. How often would we like to hear that? Update on that is that the Minister has landed, but is still getting disembarked from the plane. So what we will do is we will play the pre-record, so that just shows that you always have to have a plan B and a contingency just in case. And then hopefully by then the Minister will have got himself established to take a Q&A session. So what I am going to do is do the introduction to the Minister and position his presentation to us. So as I say, we're turning now to transport, and that's probably the portfolio that most of New Zealand and this sector talk about in terms of infrastructure. Minister Wood is the MP for Mount Roscoe. He's the Minister of Transport and Minister for Workplace Relations and Safety. And I'm sure many of us would have seen him on the television this morning talking about COVID, which may well feature in some of our questions today. He is also Deputy Leader of the House. He was first elected to Parliament at the 2016 Mount Roscoe by-election. In opposition, he was Labour's spokesperson for Transport, Revenue and Consumer Affairs. Following the 2017 election, he was appointed as Parliamentary Under-Secretary to the Minister for Ethnic Communities and became Chair of the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee. He became Labour's Senior Whip in mid-2019. As MP for New Zealand's most diverse electorate, Michael is closely connected to New Zealand's vibrant and growing ethnic communities and is focused on ensuring that every person, regardless of their background, has the ability to flourish and reach their fullest potential in our country. He has a particular interest in Auckland's urban development and is a keen supporter of high-quality affordable housing and rapid public transport in his electorate and across the city, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that today as well. He is driven by a core belief that people do well when living in strong, fair and supportive communities. He believes that an economy and public institutions that are focused on people's well-being will lead to a society that is both prosperous and just. So we're now just going to cut to the pre-record.
Inga mana, inga rau rangatira. Nau mai haere mai, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. It's my pleasure to be with you for this Building Nations event at a very important time for New Zealand. I want to speak today about a range of challenges we face in the transport sector, and it'll be no surprise to you that I'm going to begin by talking about the urgent challenge that we face to decarbonise New Zealand's transport sector. Aotearoa New Zealand is on a journey to transform the way that we do transport. Growth in our population and our economy means that we need to better plan for the future and help shape our cities to be places that can support a great quality of life. Cities thrive when people have a range of real choices about how they get to work, how they can move around safely, connect with family and friends, and access services quickly. And of course, to have access to good, affordable, decent housing. We know that when we provide the right services and infrastructure, we can also reduce our carbon emissions. Currently, the transport sector makes up almost half of carbon emissions in Aotearoa New Zealand, with most of this coming from road transport. The Independent Climate Change Commission was very clear in its advice that we have to do things differently if we are to reach our targets and our ambition to prevent disastrous climate change. Changing the way that we do things will not only reduce our emissions, it'll also improve our air quality, reduce noise pollution, reduce deaths and serious injuries, and improve life for New Zealanders in many other ways. We shouldn't underestimate the size of this task. It will require significant and structural changes to the ways that we plan and design our urban areas, and big changes in the ways that people move within and between cities. It's not something that government can do all by itself. All New Zealanders have a role to play. Transport is at the heart of making this vision a reality. Transport ultimately is an enabler. As I said, government can't snap its fingers and make it happen. It takes the work of people, organisations, businesses and communities, and many of the key people who are in this room. There are plenty of opportunities for you all to be part of giving meaning to the Climate Change Commission's recommendations. And those recommendations are going to require significant investment in time, thought, and capital. The government has already increased its investment into public transport, with approximately $5 billion planned over the next 3 years, compared to less than $2 billion under the previous government. This involves integrated mass rapid transit, as well as improved rail, cycling, and walking options. We're also investing $910 million over the next 3 years into new shared pathways, bike routes, walkways, and pedestrian facilities across the country, a significant increase on the $251 million under the last government. This will grow the more than 253 kilometres of new walking and cycling facilities that we've delivered over the past 3 years. And this investment demonstrates our government's commitment to changing the way that we do transport. Transport is no longer just about building roads. It's about giving real choices and being focused on the decarbonisation challenge. Congestion shows that our cities are not providing reliable choices for some people, which results in slower journeys and higher emissions. For example, pre-COVID, congestion in Auckland alone cost approximately $1.3 billion per year, a figure that will only increase as the city continues its rapid growth. And as our population grows, it's simply not sustainable to try and accommodate more private vehicles within limited street space. The physics just don't work. People deserve choices when it comes to transport and the option of healthier and lower emission modes. Around 70% of our trips in our urban centres are actually under 5 kilometres, and the vast majority of those currently take place in private vehicles. By removing barriers and creating safe infrastructure, we can help our cities and towns be more pleasant and healthier places to be, and safer places for children, older people, and everyone in between to get around. I also want to highlight that Climate Change Minister James Shaw recently released the government's discussion document, Te Hau Marohi ki Anamata, Transitioning to a Low Emissions and Climate Resilient Future, our draft emissions reduction plan. Achieving the targets in the document with a package of actions and policies will generate a 41% reduction in transport emissions by 2035 from our 2019 levels. This is a reduction that the Climate Change Commission recommends. Achieving these bold and ambitious targets not only have huge benefits to the environment, but will also mean that New Zealanders have better transport choices. The scale of the challenge is significant. Our transport emissions have increased by 90% since 1990, the largest increase of any sector, and we must now work to reduce them by 41% over the next 14 years. So there is work to be done. I encourage everyone to submit on the proposed actions. This is a challenge that we all have to face up to, and we need everyone's ideas on the table for how we get there. The final plan will set out future policy and regulatory change, as well as actions that can be taken by businesses, towns, cities, and every community. It will also set out how we can make the transition in an inclusive and equitable way. For our government, that's exceptionally important. Coming now to specific projects, I know that the market will be very interested in hearing some more about Auckland Light Rail. It's a hot topic in Auckland and across the infrastructure community. This city shaping project will not only be the largest infrastructure investment that New Zealand has ever made, but it will also provide one of the biggest opportunities for changing the way that Aucklanders get around while reducing our emissions. Over the next 30 years, the corridor between the city centre and Mangere has the potential to accommodate between 19 and 25% of Auckland's growth with the investment of light rail, including homes for up to 156,000 new people and 97,000 additional jobs. The project covers the first light rail line between the city centre and Mangere, connecting major employment hubs in the city and the airport at each end, but also with huge urban development areas in between. As Minister, I've committed to doing things differently, and I've acknowledged that the previous twin track process was not a good one, that it didn't engage people in a debate and a discussion about where we were heading with the project, and it was important that we were much more open. That's why we've taken a very transparent approach this year, and I've recently released the Independent Chair's summary report to give the public and the market the opportunity to see what progress has been made so far, and to understand very clearly and openly the options which the government is considering. It's important that people can see the trade-offs and the choices that we have in front of us. All procurement processes will be open, and we won't shut anyone out from bidding. There are big opportunities here for the private sector, given the significant investment that will be needed by both central and local government, with estimated costs, depending on the options, falling between $9 billion and $16.3 billion. The government will make a decision by the end of the year on the route, the mode, and the delivery entity for the project. We'll be carefully considering those trade-offs, such as costs, disruption, value for money, and the ability to achieve urban uplift. Following on from a decision on the city shaping project late this year, detailed planning and design work will start in early 2022, and it's my expectation that we will make significant progress in this term of government. It's also important to understand that this is just the start of a light rail network in Auckland. 46 years ago, the incoming Muldoon government cancelled Mayor Robbie's plan for a rapid rail network for Auckland. Our city would have been a much better place had Mayor Robbie's vision been followed through on. And some of the challenges that we face today in terms of a lack of affordable housing, urban sprawl, and a great deal of car dependency stem from that historic failure to make proper investment in a mass rapid transit system for our one big international city. I don't want us to make that mistake again. And so this plan is the first stage of building a linked up rapid transit network for our city that will include in the future a Waitemata harbour crossing that will be centred on mass rapid transit, and also a line to the northwest and the huge growth area in the northwestern communities. This, of course, will create a significant pipeline of work and certainty to enable us to build up the skills base that we need to deliver significant transport and infrastructure projects in the coming decades. And a very important focus for us is that additional Waitemata harbour crossing. In ATAP, which we announced earlier this year, the $30 billion funding package between the Crown and Auckland Council, we've allocated $60 million to progress this project earlier than was previously planned. And Waka Kotahi is currently working in partnership with Auckland Transport and Auckland Council on the next planning phase. The work will build on the previous business case investigations. It'll include a revised business case with recommendations on rapid transport connectivity, a long-term plan for walking and cycling across the harbour, and road connectivity improvements. But I want to be very clear that it needs to be a public transport-centred crossing. Community, stakeholder and industry engagement will form a key part of this process. There is clear momentum and an integration opportunity with Auckland Light Rail, the City Rail Link and the existing harbour crossing. I understand that Waka Kotahi are about to start market engagement shortly, and I'd encourage you to check it out if that's of interest. The other significant infrastructure investment currently underway is the New Zealand Upgrade Programme, which will provide growing communities with more travel choices that help people get to where they need to get to safely, and in many cases with lower emission options. The programme will help to grow our economy while responding to the impacts of travel on the environment and supporting housing growth. The government's confirmation in June of the direction and funding commitment to deliver NZ Up means that we're able to fully deliver a number of significant projects across the country that now have confirmed scope, costs and timeframes, which are also designed to better respond to climate and housing needs. And this represents a major step forward from the beginning of the programme. The New Zealand Upgrade Programme is now moving ahead with 6 projects completed, 10 projects in construction, 14 in design and consent, and more than 900 people already employed up and down New Zealand. Further down the pipeline are our plans to extend rapid transit in Wellington through Let's Get Wellington Moving, where both light rail and bus rapid transit options are being proposed. The consultation for Let's Get Wellington Moving is out, and the public are engaging with a great deal of enthusiasm at the moment. The partners, who are the Crown, Greater Wellington and Wellington City Council, intend to then make decisions on the mass rapid transit component between March and May of next year, and then to move the project forward as quickly as we can. We also have an ambition to bring rapid transit to Christchurch, so that we make sure that as Christchurch continues its rebuild, that the citizens of that growing city have access to high quality public transport and are able to develop a compact and highly livable urban form. And I look forward to making further progress on that with Christchurch City next year as they complete their spatial planning work. We'll keep working with local government right across New Zealand to work up the infrastructure that we need to unlock our cities, our towns, to encourage housing, to reduce emissions, and also to make sure that New Zealand has a resilient transport network. I encourage everyone here to provide feedback on the programs that I've talked about, if you haven't already. Many people already have. All of these programs will have a significant impact on the types of infrastructure that we deliver in New Zealand and will shape our urban centres and regional New Zealanders for many years into the future. It's vital that all of you here today engage with what are some of the most significant infrastructure developments that we've ever made in New Zealand. After decades of underinvestment in public infrastructure across transport and many other domains, our government is one that's investing, and we look forward to delivering these important projects for the people of our country together. Thank you all for attending, and I look forward to engaging with you. My very best wishes for a great conference. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. As if by magic, we have the Minister in person who has gallivanted through Auckland Airport to a room to take some Q&A. Thank you, Minister, for the time. I know you've had a very busy morning talking about some of the other portfolios that you look after, in particular health safety and the impact of the COVID mandates, etc. And we may get a couple of questions on those, but let's focus on the transport mandate first of all. I've got a couple of questions coming up on the sidebar, so bear with me. First question is, as a supporter of Auckland Light Rail, does the Minister, have you considered the outcomes outweigh the benefits? I'm just reading that again, sorry. So has there been a benefit analysis done on Auckland Light Rail?
Yes, look, thanks for the question, which is a really good one. When we got the Auckland Light Rail process back on track earlier this year, we set up the Light Rail estate, and one of their core functions was to develop up an indicative business case. This is a project that I really believe in. It's one that was a clear manifesto commitment we said we would deliver at the election, but it's also important that we know that it stacks up. The unit has now delivered its indicative business case to me and the other sponsors. That is the basis upon which Cabinet will make its decisions before the end of this year. But what I can confirm is that there's been a really thorough working through of both the costs and the benefits, and that all of the options that the unit's put forward to us, and there are three core options they've put in front of us, have a positive BCR, and the unit has said to us that all of the options stack up in terms of the business case, the economic case, and the strategic case for Auckland.
So I get linked to that then another question, which will progress first, Auckland Light Rail or the Harbour Connection project?
We have work on both underway, and actually I wouldn't look at them so much as being totally discrete projects. So we obviously have the work of the establishment unit, which has occurred this year, and subject to Cabinet decision making, we'll move into a detailed planning and engagement phase next. Work underway on an alternative Waitemata Harbour crossing. When we made the ATAP agreement earlier this year, which is the big strategic transport agreement between the government and Auckland Council, we included $60 million in funding for business case work and initial property acquisitions to support the next Waitemata Harbour crossing. That work is underway. Options are being developed up. Business case work is underway. Interim solutions are underway until we can deliver the main piece of infrastructure. But that work is happening, and there'll be further updates we'll be able to provide by as early as next year. And more broadly within the ATAP program, we've moved that project forward from the 2040s, where it was under the previous government, into the 2030s, and we'll be looking to see how we can reasonably accelerate that. The key point I would make here is that we're very clear this needs to be a mass rapid transit centred crossing if we want this to be part of a rational transport network for Auckland. And what the Auckland Light Rail team have told us is that we need to work to integrate the city centre to Mangere corridor with a future North Shore mass rapid transit crossing with the Northwestern mass rapid transit connection as well. So there'll be further work that happens there over the next 6 months or so to work out how we tie those together to finally get the linked up rapid transit system that Auckland needs.
So not surprisingly, Minister, there's lots of questions about the light rail, so bear with me on this. One of the questions here is basically, is it too late for light rail given the commitments that we have to make for carbon reduction? So, have we literally missed the bus on this?
Well, the old saying is that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, the next best time is today. And it's very much that case with a proper mass rapid transit system for Auckland. That's almost a fable in Auckland now, but Mayor Robbie back in the 1970s had a plan for rapid rail for Auckland. And had that been implemented and not quashed by the incoming Muldoon government in 1975, then many of the urban problems that we face in Auckland would not be nearly so bad. And the congestion that we face now, the ongoing urban sprawl, the high levels of car dependency to a large extent are about the fact that central government and local government didn't get together and grasp the nettle at that point. If we don't finally face up to these challenges and make the necessary investments, then the problems will only get worse. So while, yes, we should have done it decades ago, while there have been decades of lost time on these critical projects, I don't think that's a reason not to do them now. Quite the reverse. We've got to get on and get moving if we want to help Auckland to unlock its real potential.
Great. And then linked to that, I guess, is the question of funding, which I'm sure is never far from anyone's mind. And we've had a number of questions throughout the conference so far around the views of PPP, and it'd be interested just to get your views on that.
Yes. Look, we've been very clear with this particular project that it will be a public service delivery model for the delivery of this project. There's, as people know, a pretty long history around this particular project. There was a PPP option which was explored in the previous term of government. That didn't proceed. And we clearly said as part of the reset that this will be our public service delivery model. Our approach is that it's horses for courses. It was the previous Labor government which did set up the legislation which allows for PPP delivery of projects, and that's still a possibility if it stacks up. It's fair to say that there's a bit of caution and eyes wide open, given some of the experiences we've had, for example, with the Transmission Gully project, which was rushed into a PPP by the previous government, which was undercooked and which has caused some real problems and delays. So yes, that's an option for future projects, but we'll be going in eyes wide open and making sure that we're looking after taxpayer interests.
Great, thank you for that. Again, one of the conversations that's happened throughout the conference, and indeed one of the areas that's been identified by those attending the conference, is how do we attract and retain skills. And I understand, and again, I'm just reading a question, that at the party conference, there was discussion around establishing the Ministry of Works. Do you think that's likely to get legs, excuse the pun, to move forward?
Look, it's a topic that's been battered around quite a bit over the last couple of years, party conferences, but also in public dialogue. It's not something we've ruled out, but it's not something that we have immediate plans for. I think what we need to do is come to what the core issue is that we're trying to resolve here, and that is the need to make sure that now that we've got actually a significant pipeline of projects, which is what the sector has been asking for, we've got more stuff on the books and we can handle easily at the moment actually, and we can now potentially see actually a 20 or 30 year pipeline of significant mega projects. We're talking about Auckland Light Rail, additional harbour crossings, Northwest, let's get Wellington moving, the needs of Christchurch in the future as well. So there's a huge pipeline there, and between central government, private sector, the workforce, unions, we need to be coming together to be making sure that we meet the workforce needs, and particularly at all ends of the spectrum, from the core labour force we need to the highly skilled and specialised positions. Now, some of that will need to come from offshore, but I think it would be an unsatisfactory outcome if we just leant entirely on that, and we've seen how fragile that can be in a COVID world, without doing some real spade work in terms of developing up the skills and labour force that we need domestically. Now, just setting up a Ministry of Works doesn't solve that problem. You've got a vehicle, but you haven't actually got to the underlying issue. So I think there's huge work that we need to do through the construction sector accord and through other partnering options to be dealing with that issue. One of the things that I'm keen on, and I've talked about this with officials at Nicole Rosie and other officials at Waka Kotahi, is now that we can see this pipeline ahead, what is the role of the agency in terms of it playing its role as probably as the main procurer of projects in the system, to be making sure that we have that workforce.
Okay. I think that links to another question that I've got here, which is there likely to be any sort of reform of transport or infrastructure in terms of how we want to deliver things, given what has to be done over the next sort of 10, 20, 30 year horizon?
There's a huge amount to do. And I think there's always a fine balance with this between reaching for what might be the perfect theoretical structure. But of course, whenever you have large-scale reform and restructuring, quite frankly, you lose time as you're doing that. And actually, we've got some very, very good delivery agencies at the moment. So if we look at what Waka Kotahi and Kiwi Rail have been delivering at pretty good pace in recent times across things like the New Zealand Upgrade Program, we've already got projects that were locked, loaded, and have been delivered, about another 10 that are now in construction, about 14 that are in detailed design. We've got considerable expertise there to be delivering projects. One of the areas I think is worth exploring a little bit is when we get to that, really get to the next tier with the mega projects that we started talking about in terms of light rail, mass rapid transit. Is there potentially a role there for a specialised agency or arm of one of the existing delivery agencies that can really look to build up the expertise, the labour force, and the capacity to deliver those projects? Given that we haven't had too much of that occurring in New Zealand over recent years. So that's a little bit of a question that I'm exploring, but I wouldn't envisage wholesale change of delivery agencies. I think we know what we've got to do, and we've got to get people together and deliver it, and that's where the focus will be.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to try and summarise a fairly lengthy question, which is based on comments made by the chair of the Infrastructure Commission, that given the costs and the challenges that we'll be having in terms of coming out of COVID and the recovery, wouldn't it be better for government to secure resource consents designations for the second Waitemata Harbour crossing under the COVID-19 Recovery Fast Track Consenting Act now before the Act lapses? So I guess wouldn't it be better to make hay while the sun shines at the moment?
Well, look, always very interested in Dr. Bollard's views, and we'll always take them on board and have a good look into them. Look, that's a possibility. We're not quite at the point where it would be possible to make those decisions because the business case work is ongoing in terms of what the best options will actually be to deliver that project. And there are real live questions about mode, about route, about the foundational question with this particular project being a bridge or a tunnel. And we actually have to come to some conclusions around those before we can sensibly and meaningfully move on to the next stage. But that work is ongoing at the moment. It's not something that will happen in the future. So I think we'll be much better positioned next year to have some more meaningful discussions about what the next steps are, and we'll be looking to move forward with that as quickly as possible. I mean, to be really clear here as well, with projects of this scale, there are a range of options that we would consider in terms of how consenting is done. They are obviously enormously complex, extremely significant, and government will consider all of the tools at our disposal to make sure that we have processes that are robust, but also suitably efficient, given the national importance of advancing them.
Thank you. And in no particular order, and I'm conscious of your time, I think you've given us a couple of extra minutes, so thank you for that. Will the government look to Kāinga Ora to deliver Auckland Light Rail as the country's urban development authority?
It's an excellent question. One of the key findings of the Auckland Light Rail Establishment Unit is that a huge amount of the benefits that derive from this project is around the urban development side. We can potentially support between 19 and 25% of Auckland's required housing growth over the next 50 years along this corridor. So we need to think about it not just as a transport project, but as an integrated transport and urban development project. And so when we set up the establishment unit, we made sure that we started putting the building blocks in place for that. We had Kāinga Ora and we had the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development around the table right from the outset. And there will be a strengthened role for them as we move forward. And it will be a project that will be both of those things, transport and urban development. And as I say, those outcomes, potentially are really significant for Auckland. This is the kind of enabling investment that transport can bring about. We can unlock housing, we can unlock emissions reduction, we can unlock investment along that corridor, we can unlock access to employment, access to education, and get a whole lot of really good economic and social outcomes from this investment. And the urban development piece is a huge part of it. And I'll just note that one of the reasons this corridor is so important is that this stuff just isn't in the future. We're actually doing it now. So we've actually got 3 of the key Auckland housing program areas, Mount Roskill, Oranga and Mangere, where there's currently investment in new housing going in at scale that are already along this route. So it's the current growth, but also to unlock future growth.
And the penultimate question, which I think also links in your safety portfolio as well, can you also discuss the need to make significant safety improvements of our historic transport network alongside significant mass transit investment requirements and the need to decarbonise transport? So there's 3 elements to that question.
Yes, enormously important. New Zealand's road toll, the deaths and serious injuries that occur in our transport system, continue to be well above those countries that we would usually compare ourselves to, and causes immense pain and suffering across our communities. So that's an absolute priority for me and the government. Reflected in the government policy statement that we have developed to guide our investment in the transport system, where safety is one of the core objectives that we task Waka Kotahi to achieve in the investments that we make. And then to get even more specific, we now have in the National Land Transport Plan and Fund a specific activity class to support what we call our Road to Zero investments. And Road to Zero is about this concept, which has been enormously successful, particularly in Northern Europe, of developing up a plan in which we don't accept that any deaths or serious injuries should be acceptable within our system. It's a road to zero fatalities and serious injuries with serious reduction targets along the way. There's over $9 billion of funding in that activity class that we intend to invest over the next 10 years. And we're already seeing that. It goes into road safety infrastructure. So we're seeing rolling out of side barriers, median barriers, rumble strips, taking out of dangerous corners, passing lanes as appropriate, rolling out across the network. And then some of that investment also goes to support the road policing work of New Zealand Police. And then sitting alongside that, there's a big regulatory and legislative program. So we're passing through the House of Drug Driving Bill at the moment. We have changes that will be going through Cabinet early next year around the setting of safer speeds across the network. So there is a whole integrated program of work that is absolutely dedicated on bringing down that road toll and the number of people who are seriously injured on our roads.
And the final question, which again comes back to the challenges of decarbonisation. Given the urgent need to decarbonise transport quickly and the long time frames required to build city-shaping projects, the high cost of these projects, and the need to allow alternatives to private travel, how can we tackle these on multiple fronts to effectively reduce emissions? I guess that sums up the challenge we have.
It sure does. If we're to look at the recommendations of the Climate Commission, they clearly tell us that with some urgency, we need to be pulling all of the levers. It's not just one thing, and it's not just government. In response to the Climate Commission's report, I commissioned the Ministry of Transport to produce a white paper on how we would approach these issues. It was called Hikina Te Kohupara, and it was released in the middle of the year. And the broad strategy sits in 3 areas. Firstly, how do we build the avoidance of emissions into our system? And that's about better planning urban growth, so that as we create new housing and new communities, we enable people to live and move about without having to emit carbon in the first instance. A great example of that is the investments we're making at Drury, where this potentially 50 or 60,000 new houses in Auckland will be, the linchpin of that development will be 3 new rail stations, so that people have from the outset got the ability to access the mass rapid transit system. The second strategic pillar is shift, which is mode shift, giving people real transport choices. That's where the mass rapid transit, but also the improvements we're making just to the bog standard public transport networks, where we've massively increased funding this NLTF. That's where safer walking and cycling is really important. That's where some pretty tough decisions around reallocating space on our existing road network to other modes are going to have to be made. And that's going to be probably the toughest of all, but we're going to have to do it. And then the third area is how do we improve our existing fleet, acknowledging that plenty of people will still be driving vehicles. So that's why this year you've seen a very progressive, forward-leaning program from us, developing the Clean Car Standard, the Clean Car Discount, policies around biofuels, so that every time people do get in their cars, there will be fewer emissions coming out of the tailpipe on average. So it's about all of the levers, and it's about moving as fast as we can, but trying to do it in a coordinated way.
Great, thank you. Minister, we have many more questions, but as I started this morning off by saying we have a very packed agenda, so I am going to have to draw the questions to an end. Thank you very much for making the time available and actually showing that you can pivot when circumstances challenge you in terms of delayed flights. So very much appreciate your contribution today. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Margaret. Look, we've all had to pivot a whole lot over the last 2 years, and I'd just like to thank everyone who's here at the conference today for the extraordinary flexibility and resilience that you'll show, and look forward to working with you in the time ahead on these important issues. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you, Minister. Well, thank you, colleagues. That brings us to the end of this morning's session. And as I started this morning by saying, it is a packed agenda. This morning, we've heard from Minister of Housing, the Honourable Dr. Megan Woods, on the threefold approach to solving the housing crisis, meeting the immediate needs, measures in place to increase the pace of house building and the regulatory environment. We then also heard about the efforts to improve sustainability, followed by a really informative Q&A session, which touched on the urban development approach needed, a topic that we will explore further this afternoon. We had a great introduction to renewable energy by Andrew Kittle, and then a further outstanding panel discussion on the role of renewable energy in decarbonising New Zealand, something that we've heard a lot about this week, and also something that we've heard that New Zealand's geography is incredibly well suited for. Then we moved into an opposition address from National MP Andrew Bailey with Q&A, and that vein will continue this afternoon with our political panel facilitated by Fran O'Sullivan. And just now we've heard from the Minister of Transport, the Honourable Michael Wood, who lived up to his portfolio by doing his Q&A live from Auckland Airport. So this afternoon we'll turn our attention to public transport and urban regeneration, diversity and the value of diverse thinking, with discussion panels on both these topics. We'll then move on to hear from Infrastructure Commission on the recently drafted infrastructure strategy, and again our political panel, as I mentioned earlier. So thank you to our sponsors, our premier sponsor ANZ, and also to Westpac for their assistance with us today. And we'll see you back at midday for the afternoon sessions. Kia ora.